On January 12, 1897, the Wheeling Daily Intelligencer published an obituary for merchant Samuel Pritchard, survived by his devoted wife of 11 months. The notice described violent convulsions and sudden death. What the newspaper could not report was that this marked the beginning of a pattern claiming 12 lives. Before we dive into the story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss these spine-chilling revelations. And after you've subscribed, write in the comments where you're watching from and what brought you here today. Whether this finds you during your morning routine, afternoon break, or late-night deep dive, you're joining thousands of brave souls who choose to face the darkness of our past together. Now, let's continue with the story. Samuel Pritchard operated a successful dry goods store on Main Street in Wheeling, a prosperous city along the Ohio River, where coal money flowed freely in the late 1890s. He had been a confirmed bachelor until age 42, devoted to his business and his aging mother, who died in the spring of 1896. Friends noted how Samuel's demeanor changed after his mother's passing, how loneliness seemed to settle over him like fog over the river. Viola Kensington arrived in Wheeling that summer, taking a room at the respectable Riverside boarding house. She presented herself as a widow from Huntington, her husband lost to typhoid fever the previous year. At 31, she possessed an unusual combination of qualities for a woman of her era and circumstances. She spoke with refinement, dressed modestly but elegantly, and carried herself with quiet dignity that suggested breeding and education beyond what her circumstances implied. The boarding housekeeper, Martha Devereaux, later recalled how Viola quickly became popular among the establishment's residents. She assisted with household tasks without being asked, offered thoughtful conversation at evening meals, and displayed particular kindness toward the elderly boarders. It was Martha who introduced Viola to Samuel Pritchard when he came calling one August afternoon to discuss a fabric order. The courtship proceeded with surprising speed. Samuel, unaccustomed to female attention and still grieving his mother, found himself captivated by Viola's gentle manner and sympathetic ear. She listened to his stories about building his business, about his mother's long illness, about his loneliness in the large house he now occupied alone. Within 6 weeks, Samuel proposed marriage. They wed in a simple ceremony at the Methodist Church on September 23, 1896. Samuel's business associates noticed changes in the merchant after his marriage. He seemed distracted, less focused on his accounts. He mentioned that Viola encouraged him to slow down, to enjoy life rather than working constantly. She managed their household with efficiency, assisting through preparing his roast personally and dismissing the housekeeper he had employed for years. By December, Samuel's health began to deteriorate. He complained of stomach pains and nausea. Dr. Vincent Hargrove, who had treated the Pritchard family for 2 decades, diagnosed nervous dyspepsia, brought on by overwork, and prescribed rest and bland foods. Viola nursed him with devoted attention, preparing special broths and tonics, sitting by his bedside through long nights. The end came quickly. On January 10, 1898, Samuel suffered violent convulsions that racked his body for hours. Dr. Hargrove, summoned urgently, could do nothing but administer morphine for the pain. Samuel Pritchard died in agony the following morning, his widow weeping inconsolably at his bedside. The funeral drew considerable attendance from Wheeling's business community. Viola, dressed in deep mourning, accepted condolences with quiet grace. The estate, valued at nearly $6,000, including the store and house, passed entirely to her. Within 3 months, she sold both properties and departed Wheeling, leaving no forwarding address. Viola resurfaced in Charleston in May of 1898, residing at a boarding house on Capitol Street. She introduced herself to fellow residents as a twice-widowed woman seeking a fresh start in the state capital. Her story varied slightly from the one she had told in Wheeling. Now she claimed her first husband had been a lawyer who died of heart failure, omitting any mention of Samuel Pritchard or his dry goods store. Edmund Farley worked as a clerk for the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, managing freight schedules and bills of lading. At 37, he lived frugally in a single room, sending money each month to his widowed sister in Ohio. He had given up thoughts of marriage years earlier, convinced his modest salary and plain appearance offered little appeal to potential wives. Viola encountered Edmund at the post office, where he collected railway correspondence each morning. She contrived to need assistance with a parcel, and Edmund, ever courteous, helped her arrange shipping. Their conversations became routine, then anticipated, then deliberately sought. By June, Edmund was calling on Viola at her boarding house, bringing small gifts and speaking nervously of his prospects. They married in August, a quiet ceremony witnessed by Edmund's railway colleagues. His sister received a letter describing his new bride in glowing terms, expressing relief that Edmund had finally found companionship. The couple rented a small house on Lee Street, and Edmund's life acquired a domestic routine he had never imagined possible. Viola expressed concern about their financial security almost immediately. She pointed out that Edmund's railway work involved danger, that accidents occurred regularly along the tracks and in the freight yards. She suggested life insurance, presenting it as prudent planning rather than morbid thinking. Edmund, wanting to please his wife and provide for her should anything happen, purchased a policy through the Mutual Benefit Life Insurance Company for $3,000. The railway clerk's health declined in December. He struggled to maintain his work schedule, returning home each evening exhausted and nauseated. Viola prepared special meals to settle his stomach, insisting he eat despite his lack of appetite. Edmund's supervisor noticed his deteriorating condition and suggested he take leave. But Edmund refused, worried about losing wages. By March of 1899, Edmund could no longer hide his illness. Dr. Francis Pemberton examined him and found severe gastrointestinal distress with no apparent cause. The physician recommended hospitalization, but Viola insisted she could provide better care at home. Edmund trusted her judgment, grateful for her attentive nursing. The convulsions began on April 2nd. Edmund's body contorted violently as Viola summoned Dr. Pemberton in apparent panic. The physician arrived to find his patient in extreme distress, pupils dilated, skin clammy, and pale. Edmund Farley died that evening, 8 months after his wedding day. The death certificate listed acute gastric fever as the cause. The insurance company processed Viola's claim without question, and $3,000 arrived by bank draft within 6 weeks. Edmund's sister traveled from Ohio for the funeral, finding Viola genuinely distraught and sympathetic. Before departing, the sister offered Viola a place in Ohio should she need family support. Viola declined graciously. By July, she had disappeared from Charleston, leaving her landlord a month's advance rent and a forwarding address that proved to be non-existent. Court records would later show she arrived in Parkersburg that same month, ready to begin again. Nathan Reedus owned shares in 3 coal mines operating in the hills outside Parkersburg, investments that generated steady income without requiring his presence underground. At 41, he had accumulated enough wealth to live comfortably in a well-appointed house on Avery Street, though he lived alone with only a housekeeper who came twice weekly. His wife had died in childbirth 7 years earlier, taking their son with her, and Nathan had withdrawn into solitude and business ledgers. Viola encountered him at the First Presbyterian Church in September of 1899. She had been attending services regularly, presenting herself as a devout widow seeking spiritual comfort after losing 2 husbands to illness. Nathan noticed her quiet presence in the back pews, the way she sang hymns with genuine feeling. The pastor's wife made introductions after a Sunday service, and Nathan found himself inviting Viola to a church social. Their courtship followed a now-practiced pattern, though Nathan's wealth required adjustments to Viola's approach. She appeared less eager, more hesitant about remarriage, claiming her heart had been broken too many times. This reluctance only intensified Nathan's interest. By December, he proposed, and Viola accepted with convincing tears of joy and trepidation. They married in January of 1900. Nathan's business associates attended the wedding, several commenting approvingly on his choice. The bride seemed refined and proper, exactly the sort of respectable woman a coal investor should have as a wife. Viola moved into the Avery Street house, immediately dismissing the housekeeper and taking complete control of household management. Leopold Krantz operated Parkersburg Pharmacy on Market Street, an establishment his father had founded in 1872. State law required pharmacists to maintain detailed records of all poison sales, following a notorious 1892 case where arsenic purchased for rat control had been used to murder a wealthy merchant in Grafton. Leopold took these requirements seriously, recording every customer's name, stated purpose, and quantity purchased in leather-bound ledgers. Viola made her first arsenic purchase in March of 1900, claiming rats had infested the coal cellar. Leopold noted the transaction without suspicion. When she returned in April requesting another tin, he mentioned that persistent infestations often required professional exterminators. Viola explained that her husband preferred she handle household matters personally, and Leopold sold her the poison. By autumn, Leopold noticed a pattern. Viola had purchased arsenic 4 times from his pharmacy, always paying cash, always claiming household pest problems. His professional curiosity prompted him to check with colleagues at other Parkersburg pharmacies. 2 confirmed they had sold arsenic to a woman matching Viola's description, though she had given different addresses. Nathan Reedus fell ill in October. The symptoms arrived suddenly: cramping, vomiting, weakness so profound he could barely rise from bed. Dr. Raymond Thatcher treated him for gastric distress, prescribing medicines that provided no relief. Viola nursed her husband with tireless devotion, preparing special meals and administering his medications personally. The coal investor's condition worsened rapidly. By the 3rd week of October, Nathan screamed through convulsions that lasted hours. Dr. Thatcher, deeply troubled by symptoms he could not explain, consulted medical texts searching for answers. On October 24, 1900, Nathan Reedus died in agony. Leopold Krantz read the obituary in the Parkersburg Sentinel with growing unease. He retrieved his sales ledgers and counted the entries. Viola Reedus had purchased arsenic 6 times in 7 months. He sat in his pharmacy that evening, staring at the pages, wondering if his professional duty extended beyond record-keeping into investigation. Leopold Krantz waited 3 weeks before approaching anyone with his suspicions. The accusation he contemplated could destroy an innocent woman's reputation if he was wrong, yet the pattern in his ledgers seemed too deliberate to ignore. In mid-November of 1900, he requested a private meeting with Coroner James Wickham, bringing his sales records and the information gathered from other pharmacists. Wickham listened with growing alarm. He had signed Nathan Reedus's death certificate, attributing the death to acute gastric fever without questioning the diagnosis. Now, confronted with evidence of excessive arsenic purchases, he recognized his potential failure. The coroner pulled Nathan's file and reviewed Dr. Thatcher's notes, finding descriptions that suddenly took on sinister meaning. The convulsions, the violent gastrointestinal distress, the rapid deterioration. The coroner contacted the Cabell County prosecutor, Gerald Cunningham, who had earned a reputation for thorough investigation and disinterest in political consequences. Cunningham reviewed the evidence with cold precision. He ordered discreet inquiries into Viola Reedus's background, dispatching investigators to Charleston and Wheeling to trace her previous marriages. What they discovered shocked even Cunningham's experienced staff. Viola had been married at least 3 times in West Virginia alone, and each husband had died within months of wedding her. Insurance claims totaling over $9,000 had been paid to her across 3 counties. Death certificates listed similar causes: gastric fever, acute dyspepsia, intestinal inflammation. The investigators found additional arsenic purchases recorded in Charleston pharmacy ledgers. In December, Cunningham presented his findings to Circuit Judge Theodore Blackburn, requesting exhumation orders for Nathan Reedus and the 2 previous husbands buried in West Virginia. Judge Blackburn, recognizing the gravity of the accusations, granted the orders immediately. The exhumations would begin after the new year, starting with Nathan Reedus. Viola remained in Parkersburg through the holidays, apparently unaware of the investigation building around her. She had not yet collected Nathan's life insurance, delayed by some administrative confusion at the company offices. She attended church services on Christmas, accepting condolences from congregation members who still viewed her as a tragic widow. The first exhumation occurred on January 8, 1905, at Parkersburg's Riverview Cemetery. Workers removed Nathan Reedus's coffin under heavy guard as curious onlookers gathered beyond the cemetery gates. The body was transported to the county courthouse, where Dr. Franklin Osborne from the State Medical College waited with his testing equipment. Dr. Osborne had studied toxicology in Philadelphia and published papers on arsenic detection in human tissue. He employed the Marsh test, a chemical process that could identify arsenic even in decomposed remains. The procedure took 3 days, during which Cunningham ordered the exhumation of Edmund Farley's body from a Charleston cemetery. On January 11th, Dr. Osborne presented his findings to Prosecutor Cunningham. Nathan Reedus's stomach, liver, and intestinal tissue contained arsenic concentrations so extreme they had actually preserved the organs from normal decomposition. The levels were consistent with repeated poisoning over several weeks, administered in doses sufficient to cause agonizing death while avoiding immediate suspicion. Cunningham immediately issued an arrest warrant for Viola Reedus on charges of murder. Sheriff deputies found her at the Avery Street house, calmly packing belongings as if preparing to leave town. She expressed surprise at the accusation, tears flowing as she proclaimed her innocence. The deputies escorted her to the county jail, while Dr. Osborne prepared to examine Edmund Farley's remains. News of Viola's arrest spread rapidly through Parkersburg and across West Virginia. The Wheeling Daily Intelligencer ran a front-page story under the headline, "Black Widow Suspected in Multiple Poisoning Deaths." Dr. Osborne's examination of Edmund Farley revealed identical findings: catastrophic arsenic poisoning that had preserved tissue like a chemical bath. Prosecutor Cunningham now possessed physical evidence of 2 murders, but his investigators had uncovered references to earlier marriages that seemed to vanish into gaps in public records. The question that haunted Cunningham was simple and terrible. How many others had there been? The search for Viola's first husband began with property records in Huntington, where she claimed to have been widowed before arriving in Wheeling. Investigators found a house sale dated July of 1895, signed by Viola Whitlow, granting her ownership of a modest property on Fifth Avenue. The deed indicated she had inherited it from her husband, Thomas Whitlow, but no death certificate existed in Cabell County records. County Clerk Martin Jessup searched his archives thoroughly, finding the marriage license issued to Thomas Whitlow and Viola Stanton in March of 1895. Thomas had listed his occupation as freight handler at the Chesapeake and Ohio rail yards. But after July, Thomas Whitlow simply ceased to exist in official records. No burial permit, no cemetery plot, no obituary in the Huntington newspapers. Investigators interviewed neighbors who had lived on Fifth Avenue during that period. An elderly woman named Clara Bingham remembered the Whitlows clearly. She recalled Thomas as a quiet, hard-working man who kept regular hours at the rail yards. In late June of 1895, Clara noticed Thomas had stopped appearing for work. When she inquired, Viola explained that Thomas had taken sudden employment on a riverboat heading south, seeking better wages. This explanation satisfied neighbors at the time, though several found it odd that Thomas left without saying goodbye. Within 2 weeks, Viola had sold the house and departed Huntington. Clara remembered the speed of it all, how efficiently Viola liquidated Thomas's possessions and closed his bank account. The freight handler's family in Ohio received a brief letter stating Thomas had decided to seek his fortune elsewhere and would contact them when settled. He never did. Cunningham dispatched investigators to the rail yards, searching employment records from 1895. They found Thomas Whitlow's hiring documents and time cards showing regular attendance until June 23rd, when he failed to report for his shift. The yard foreman had noted "abandoned position" in the ledger. No final wages were ever collected. The prosecutor ordered searches along the Guyandotte River, focusing on areas accessible from Fifth Avenue. Drag lines pulled through winter currents for 3 weeks, finding nothing. Cunningham expanded the search to abandoned wells, mine shafts, and wooded areas surrounding Huntington. Each effort yielded no trace of Thomas Whitlow's remains. What investigators did discover was Viola's pattern emerging clearly for the first time. Thomas Whitlow had possessed assets but no life insurance. His death or disappearance had been profitable, but not spectacularly so. The marriage to Samuel Pritchard showed refinement of method, a life insurance policy, a wealthier target, a more convincing widow's grief. Each subsequent marriage had built on lessons learned. Cunningham realized he was confronting something unprecedented in West Virginia legal history. Viola had not killed impulsively or out of passion. She had developed a system, perfected it through practice, and operated it across county lines to avoid detection. Thomas Whitlow represented her first attempt, possibly her first murder, and the only victim whose body she had successfully hidden. The newspapers began calling him the ghost husband, the missing man whose fate might never be known. While Viola sat in the Cabell County Jail maintaining her innocence, Prosecutor Cunningham's investigation expanded beyond West Virginia's borders. A telegram from the Kentucky State Police arrived in late January of 1905, reporting 2 suspicious deaths in Ashland that matched the pattern Cunningham had described in his inquiry circulars. Detective William Sutherland traveled from Ashland with case files documenting the deaths of Henry Dalton in 1898 and George Kenmore in 1901. Both men had married a widow named Victoria Kensington, died within months of gastric illness and left substantial insurance benefits. Detective Sutherland brought photographs of the widow, and courthouse staff confirmed the woman was unmistakably Viola. Dr. Osborne coordinated with Kentucky authorities to exhume both bodies from Ashland cemeteries. The remains revealed the same catastrophic arsenic levels found in Nathan Reedus and Edmund Farley. Cunningham now possessed evidence of 4 proven murders, 1 missing man, and growing suspicion that additional victims existed in other states. Financial investigator Marcus Trent, hired by the insurance companies facing massive fraud claims, traced Viola's banking records across 7 counties. His findings exposed the calculating precision of her enterprise. She had opened accounts under different variations of her name: Viola Kensington, Victoria Kensington, Viola Whitlow, V.K. Pritchard. Each account received insurance payments or property sale proceeds, then was drained before she moved to her next location. Trent discovered life insurance policies totaling $48,000 paid to Viola between 1897 and 1904. She had purchased policies through different companies, maintaining the fiction of separate identities to avoid triggering suspicion. The Mutual Benefit Life Insurance Company alone had paid $12,000 across 3 claims without recognizing they had insured multiple husbands of the same woman. More disturbing were the documents Trent found in Charleston courthouse records, forged signatures on property deeds and insurance applications. Handwriting analysis proved Viola had signed her husband's names on several documents, inflating policy values or altering beneficiary designations after the men were too ill to notice or object. Investigation into Viola's movements revealed gaps that suggested additional victims. Between her departure from Ashland in 1901 and her arrival in Parkersburg in 1899, she had lived somewhere for nearly 2 years. Cunningham sent inquiries to counties throughout Ohio and Pennsylvania, requesting searches for marriage licenses and death certificates involving any variation of Viola's names. The responses arrived through February. In Marietta, Ohio, a merchant named Franklin Cassidy had married Viola Kenmore in 1902, dying 4 months later of acute gastric illness. In Morgantown, a bank clerk named Robert Sheffield wed Victoria Stanton in 1903, succumbing to similar symptoms within 6 months. Each man had purchased life insurance naming his wife as beneficiary shortly after marriage. Cunningham filed requests for exhumation orders in Ohio and requested cooperation from Pennsylvania authorities still searching records. By March, the confirmed victim count had reached 7 dead, with Thomas Whitlow still missing, and investigations ongoing in 3 additional states. The scope of Viola's crimes exceeded anything in American criminal history involving a female perpetrator. Newspapers across the country covered the case with lurid fascination. The New York Times ran a feature titled "The Husband Killer of West Virginia," while the Chicago Tribune published diagrams mapping Viola's trail of death across state lines. Public fascination grew intense as investigators worked to identify every victim of the woman who collected husbands like macabre trophies. The search of Viola's lodgings at the Avery Street House yielded evidence that transformed the investigation from circumstantial to damning. Hidden beneath floorboards in her bedroom, investigators discovered a leather satchel containing documents that revealed the methodical nature of her crimes. Inside were newspaper clippings about each husband's death, insurance policy copies, and a small leather journal filled with meticulous handwriting. The journal entries were not confessions, but calculations. Viola had recorded financial assessments of potential husbands, noting their assets, insurance values, and estimated timelines. Next to Nathan Reedus's name, she had written coal investments, property value estimated $5,000, insurance $3,000, timeline 6 to 8 months. Similar entries existed for other victims, each reduced to monetary worth and projected profit margins. More chilling were the dosage notations scattered through the journal's pages. Viola had experimented with arsenic quantities, recording symptoms and deterioration rates. After Edmund Farley's death, she noted that smaller, more frequent doses produced slower decline and less suspicion than larger amounts. She had refined her technique like a craftsman, perfecting a trade. Investigators also found correspondence with insurance companies, written in Viola's hand, but signed with her husband's names. She had forged applications for policy increases, medical questionnaires declaring perfect health, and beneficiary designations. The forgeries were skillful enough to pass initial scrutiny, but collapsed under expert examination. Prosecutor Cunningham brought in handwriting analyst Professor David Langford from the University of West Virginia, who compared the forged signatures against legitimate documents signed by the victims before their illnesses began. Langford identified consistent patterns in letter formation and pen pressure that proved Viola had signed documents worth thousands of dollars in her husband's names. The most disturbing discovery came from a small tin box hidden in the cellar, wrapped in oilcloth and buried beneath coal. Inside, investigators found locks of hair, each tied with thread and labeled with initials and dates: T.W. 1895, S.P. 1897, E.F. 1899. The collection continued through all confirmed victims, trophies preserved like specimens. Alongside the hair samples were photographs, some taken from family albums, others appearing to have been made specifically by Viola. Several images showed her husbands in obvious states of illness, gaunt and hollow-eyed, captured perhaps days before death. She had documented their suffering with the detachment of a scientist recording experimental results. Deputy Sheriff James Dalton, who had participated in the search, later testified that finding the hair collection affected him more profoundly than any crime scene he had witnessed. The calculated preservation suggested Viola viewed her victims not as human beings, but as accomplishments to be cataloged and remembered. Financial investigator Trent completed his analysis in early March, presenting Cunningham with a comprehensive report. Viola had accumulated $48,000 through insurance fraud alone, equivalent to roughly $1 million in contemporary value. Additional income from property sales and liquidated assets brought her total gains to approximately $60,000. She had spent conservatively, maintaining the appearance of modest widowhood, while accumulating wealth she apparently never intended to enjoy through normal expenditure. The evidence painted a portrait of systematic predation, unlike anything in American criminal history. Viola had not killed from passion, jealousy, or momentary rage. She had murdered for profit with the cold efficiency of a businesswoman managing investments, viewing marriage as merely the mechanism through which she accessed her victims' lives and resources. Cunningham prepared his case for trial, knowing he possessed enough evidence to convict Viola multiple times over. The trial commenced on April 3, 1905, at the Kanawha County Courthouse in Charleston. Judge Theodore Blackburn presided over proceedings that drew journalists from as far as Boston and San Francisco. The courthouse could accommodate only 200 spectators, but crowds exceeding 1,000 gathered outside daily, forcing the sheriff to deploy additional deputies for crowd control. Viola entered the courtroom each morning, dressed in elaborate mourning attire, black silk dresses with high collars, and veils that partially obscured her face. She maintained perfect composure, sitting motionless beside her defense attorney, Lawrence Hendricks, who had taken the case despite widespread public conviction of her guilt. Hendricks had defended unpopular clients before, but never one facing such overwhelming evidence. Prosecutor Cunningham opened with a methodical presentation that consumed 3 days. He walked the jury through the timeline of deaths, the insurance policies, the arsenic purchases, and the financial gains. He introduced Dr. Osborne, who explained the Marsh test and presented tissue samples showing arsenic concentrations that left no doubt about poisoning. The jury examined the preserved organs, several members visibly disturbed by their unnatural preservation. Leopold Krantz testified about Viola's repeated arsenic purchases, producing his ledgers with dated entries. He described how her frequency of purchases had alarmed him, how she rotated between pharmacies to avoid suspicion. Under cross-examination, Hendricks attempted to establish that rat infestations were common in coal cellar homes, but Krantz noted that 6 purchases in 7 months exceeded any legitimate pest control need. The prosecution's most powerful testimony came from Emma Trask, Nathan Reedus's former housekeeper. Emma had been dismissed by Viola immediately after the marriage, but she had known Nathan for years and found his sudden illness suspicious. She testified that Nathan had been in perfect health before his wedding, that he had never suffered stomach ailments, and that Viola had insisted on preparing all his food personally, refusing even to allow Emma to wash dishes. Under Cunningham's questioning, Emma described watching Viola through the kitchen window one afternoon before her dismissal. She had seen Viola stirring something white into Nathan's coffee, then carefully washing the spoon and hiding the container in her apron pocket. Emma had thought nothing of it at the time, assuming it was sugar or medicine, but the memory haunted her after Nathan's death. Hendricks attacked Emma's credibility, suggesting resentment over her dismissal had colored her testimony. But Emma remained unshakable, stating simply that she had watched a good man die and wished she had understood what she was witnessing in time to prevent it. The defense strategy relied on depicting Viola as a tragic figure, persecuted for the misfortune of surviving multiple husbands. Hendricks argued that circumstantial evidence and coincidence had been misconstrued as conspiracy. He pointed out that arsenic was commonly used for household purposes, that gastric illnesses were frequent causes of death in the early 1900s, and that Viola's grief appeared genuine to those who knew her. But Hendricks faced an insurmountable obstacle: the physical evidence from exhumed bodies. He could not explain away the catastrophic arsenic levels found in 7 corpses. He could not account for the forged signatures or the calculated journal entries. When he presented Viola's character witnesses, Cunningham demolished them on cross-examination, revealing that each had known Viola only briefly, during periods when she was performing the role of devoted wife. The trial continued into its 3rd week, with Viola still maintaining her mask of innocent persecution. On April 24th, as Prosecutor Cunningham prepared his closing arguments, Viola requested an emergency conference with Judge Blackburn. Her attorney appeared shocked by whatever she had told him privately. The courtroom buzzed with speculation as Blackburn cleared the gallery for a closed session with only the defendant, attorneys, and court recorder present. When proceedings resumed an hour later, Blackburn announced that the defendant wished to make a statement. Viola rose, removed her veil for the first time during the trial, and faced the packed courtroom with unsettling calm. Her voice, when she spoke, carried none of the trembling grief she had displayed in previous appearances. She admitted administering arsenic to 7 husbands: Samuel Pritchard, Edmund Farley, Nathan Reedus, Henry Dalton, George Kenmore, Franklin Cassidy, and Robert Sheffield. She described the methodology with clinical precision, explaining how she had refined her dosages, how she had learned to simulate grief convincingly, how she had selected victims based on their assets and isolation. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as she detailed murders with the detachment of someone discussing household accounts. But when Cunningham pressed her about Thomas Whitlow, Viola's composure shifted. She refused to confirm or deny his death, stating only that he had been her first husband, and that what happened to him would remain her secret. Cunningham demanded answers. The gallery erupted in shouts. Judge Blackburn threatened contempt charges. Viola simply shook her head, returning to her seat with a slight smile that chilled everyone who witnessed it. Her partial confession continued through the afternoon. She acknowledged forging signatures and maintaining multiple identities. She confirmed the journal entries and admitted keeping the hair samples as mementos. When asked why she had killed, Viola's response stunned the courtroom. She explained that society offered women few paths to financial independence, that marriage was the only avenue available to her, and that she had simply made it profitable. She expressed no remorse, describing her victims as means to an end, nothing more. Defense attorney Hendricks attempted to salvage something from the disaster, suggesting his client's confession proved mental defect or moral insanity. But Viola rejected this characterization, insisting she had acted rationally and with clear purpose. She had wanted wealth and independence, had developed a method to obtain both, and had executed her plan successfully for nearly a decade. Her only mistake, she suggested, was underestimating Leopold Krantz's attention to his ledgers. Cunningham seized on her confession during closing arguments, pointing out that Viola showed more concern for her methodology than for the 7 men she had murdered. He emphasized her refusal to reveal Thomas Whitlow's fate, suggesting she took pleasure in maintaining power over at least one victim's story. He asked the jury to consider what sort of person carefully preserved hair from men she had poisoned, who photographed them as they died, who calculated their worth in dollar amounts before deciding their timeline of suffering. The jury received the case on April 26th. Spectators expected lengthy deliberations, given the complexity of evidence and multiple murder charges. Instead, the jury returned after only 2 hours. The foreman stood and pronounced guilty verdicts on 7 counts of first-degree murder. Viola received the verdicts without visible emotion, her face a mask of indifference. Judge Blackburn scheduled sentencing for May 1st, and the courtroom emptied with everyone understanding that Viola Kensington faced execution. The only question remaining was whether she would ever reveal what happened to Thomas Whitlow. Judge Blackburn delivered his sentence on May 1st, 1905. In a courtroom filled beyond capacity, he condemned Viola's crimes as unprecedented in their calculation and cruelty, noting that she had transformed marriage into murder and affection into exploitation. He sentenced her to death by hanging, with execution scheduled for September 15th at the West Virginia State Penitentiary in Moundsville. Viola showed no reaction to the sentence. When asked if she had any statement, she declined. As deputies escorted her from the courtroom, she paused to look at the gallery, her expression enigmatic. Journalists later debated whether they had seen defiance or satisfaction in that final glance. During her months in the death cell, Viola received numerous visitors. Prosecutors hoped she might reveal Thomas Whitlow's location, offering no legal benefit, but appealing to whatever conscience she might possess. Newspaper reporters sought interviews, offering payment for her story. Religious counselors attempted to secure her repentance and confession. Viola entertained some visitors and refused others, maintaining control over her final narrative. In August, she granted an interview to a reporter from the Charleston Gazette, providing additional details about her methodology, but steadfastly refusing to discuss her first husband. When pressed, she stated that Thomas Whitlow was the only secret she intended to keep, the only power she retained. She suggested his fate was worse than arsenic poisoning, but would not elaborate. The interview concluded with Viola laughing at the reporter's frustration, enjoying the mystery she had created. Prison records documented her behavior as unnervingly calm. She ate regularly, slept without apparent nightmares, and showed no signs of mental deterioration. Guards reported she seemed more at peace than many inmates facing lesser sentences. She requested books on finance and property law, reading them methodically as if planning future ventures she would never undertake. On September 14th, Viola's attorney filed a final appeal for clemency with Governor Albert White, arguing that executing a woman set a dangerous precedent regardless of her crimes. Governor White denied the appeal within hours, stating that justice demanded equal treatment and that Viola's gender did not exempt her from consequences of systematic murder. The execution occurred at dawn on September 15th. Viola walked to the gallows without assistance, refusing the traditional hood. She stood on the platform as Warden Thomas Givens read the death warrant, her expression unchanging. When offered final words, she spoke clearly enough for witnesses to hear. "I regret nothing except being caught. Thomas Whitlow knows what he did to deserve his fate, and that knowledge dies with me." The trap door opened at 6:14 in the morning. Prison physician Dr. Harold Brennan pronounced her dead 12 minutes later. She was 39 years old and had murdered at least 12 men across 5 states, though some investigators believed the actual count might be higher. Thomas Whitlow's body was never found. Searches continued sporadically for years, focusing on areas around Huntington where Viola might have disposed of remains. The Guyandotte River gave up no secrets. Abandoned mine shafts yielded nothing. Property excavations at the Fifth Avenue house proved fruitless. Viola Kensington was buried in an unmarked grave at the prison cemetery, her location deliberately obscured to prevent grave robbers seeking macabre souvenirs. Her case prompted changes in insurance regulations and pharmacy record-keeping across multiple states. The story of the widow who collected husbands like trophies became legend in West Virginia, a cautionary tale about the darkness that can hide behind respectable facades. If this investigation into one of America's most calculating serial killers has captivated you, imagine what other forgotten horrors lurk in historical archives waiting to be uncovered. Click the like button and subscribe to the channel because we dive deep into the darkest corners of true crime history, bringing you meticulously researched stories that reveal the shocking truth behind America's most disturbing cases. Your support helps us continue uncovering these haunting tales that time tried to bury.